Hello and welcome to Smaulgld's update on Federal Reserve gold holdings for other nations. The other day we talked about the German Bundesbank having successfully completed its repatriated requested amounts of gold held by the Federal Reserve, bringing home now approximately 50% of all of their gold and still retaining some of their gold, about 39% of their entire gold reserves at the New York Federal Reserve, although they have pulled back a significant portion of their gold to the Bundesbank. Now, Germany was not the only country to request to get its gold back in recent years, but they were the first in the recent rash of requests, and they kicked off somewhat of an international gold repatriation craze. So we're going to go through the other central banks that have asked for their gold and then show you some charts on the gold holdings by the Federal Reserve of other countries and how they've diminished over the past 30-40 years. And also we're going to show you the US official gold position over the past 140 years. So let's take a look. Other central banks request their gold back from the New York Fed. Direct response to Germany. Germany is the leading country in Europe. They requested their gold back. They created a stir, and the other European countries thought, if Germany wants their gold back, there must be a good reason. They're the whole key to the euro. We better ask for our gold back. Now, the total gold held by the United States for its own account, as many of you know, has declined precipitously over the last 70, 80 years. Also, the gold held by the Fed for other nations is on decline. Just a quick reminder for those who appreciate the work that we do here at Smaulgld, we do not have advertising Google AdSense on our account, so please donate to keep the site running. You can do so through the links below via PayPal. You can do so via Bitcoin, or you could become a Patreon through the link below, where you can donate a small amount or a large amount every month to help keep the site running. Or you can go to smaulgld.com, subscribe, become a subscriber. It's free, and also use the links there. Now, Germany's repatriation request set off a wave of gold repatriation requests. They kicked it off in early 2013 when they made their request to the New York Federal Reserve. Now, according to, I think it was a Forbes report, they said they wanted to have their gold home in the case of a currency crisis. Now, what crisis might that be? Well, perhaps they were thinking the US dollar, which was in the midst of unprecedented QE, or maybe they were talking about what they saw on the horizon, a crisis in the euro, or maybe the yen. Who knows? But there's enough issues with debt and fiat currencies that Germany thought it might be a good idea to get some of their gold back. Now, they were told to basically go pound sand the first time they asked, but they persisted. And as we pointed out a couple of days ago, they finally, after 4 years, received the amount of gold that they had wanted to get back from the New York Federal Reserve. That was all touted as being early because originally they were told it would take 7 years to get the gold back. Then, in November 2014, the Netherlands, with no announcement of wanting to get their gold back, had announced that it had repatriated 122 tons of its gold from the New York Fed. Now, this was during the period of time where Germany hadn't received that much gold back yet from its repatriation schedule. So the Netherlands seemed to have pulled off a coup where they had managed to get 122 tons of their gold back much faster than Germany had, and they got their entire request done in one fell swoop. Soon after the Dutch gold repatriation news broke, there was news that Belgium and Austria are also considering repatriating their gold. Then in November 2014, Marine Le Pen, she made a request to the National Bank of France encouraging it to repatriate its gold. This woman may become president later on in 2017, and of course she can direct, perhaps. I don't know the rules of French banking, but instead of writing a letter as a concerned political figure, she might be able to direct the National Bank of France to repatriate its gold. Then, also in 2014, we had the Save Our Swiss Gold, which would have required it was a referendum in Switzerland, which would have required Switzerland to repatriate its gold as well. Also in 2012, Venezuela had repatriated its gold and paraded it through the streets. They have since sold a significant portion of that gold because of their current, well, they have a currency crisis, they have a financial crisis, so they have been selling gold in order to hopefully or try to balance their finances. Also, since 2013, Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan have added significant amounts of gold to their reserves. And Armenia has recently announced that it wishes to restore its gold reserves. So you see the countries in the West not adding gold, but at least requesting their gold back from the New York Fed. And then you see Eastern central banks adding gold to their reserves. Now, only England, Switzerland, Canada, they've kind of gone off gold and they have sold gold over the past 10, 15 years. But the trend at least seems to be in the major Western nations to hold on to their gold, to get it back from the Fed where it's being stored, if that's where they have it. And then in the Western central banks, it's to pile on and stack the gold bars. And this highlights the importance of gold as a reserve asset. Now let's talk about the New York Federal Reserve, custodian of the world's gold. This is a statement from the New York Federal Reserve website. None of the gold stored in the vaults below belongs to the New York Fed or the Federal Reserve System. The New York Fed acts as the guardian and custodian of the gold on behalf of account holders, which includes the U.S. government, foreign governments, other central banks, and official international organizations. So the U.S. government does have some of its gold there. They have some in West Point. I think 60-70% of it's in Fort Knox. And not going into the accounting issues and the audit issues, the U.S. government has officially stated on its reserve balance as 8,100 tons or so. Now, the New York Fed has acted as custodian for other countries' gold for a long time. Much of the gold came to the New York Fed during and after World War II to be held for safekeeping. After the war, many European nations kept their gold at the New York Fed due to the Cold War. They were worried that Russia might use the Warsaw Pact and roll through Western Europe, just as Germany had rolled through Western Europe. At its peak, and we'll look at the chart in a second, in 1973, the New York Fed held over 12,000 tons of gold in custody for others. Today, more than half of that is gone. I think it's down to about 5,700 tons. There's the building. That's 44 Maiden Lane. And if you know New York City, it's down by Wall Street. There's your picture. So gold is leaving the vaults of the New York Federal Reserve for a variety of reasons, but mostly because countries want their gold back. They have storage facilities that they've built or they had pre-existing. They're less concerned about Russia. They're less concerned about safety of their gold. They think they could keep a better eye on it than perhaps the New York Fed can in New York. Let's take a look at the recent removal of gold from the U.S. Federal Reserve. This chart by Nick Laird at Gold Charts R Us starts at 2000. You can see there's periods of time where no one asks for any gold. It kind of levels off. Let's take a look at a bigger chart. Here we go. So this one shows the period right at the financial crisis, 2007-8. There were a lot of requests, and then things went quiet, and then you see Germany ask for it, and then boom, you see a few hundred tons go to Germany and other countries, and we're down now at the New York Federal Reserve to 5,700 tons. So they're no longer holding a lot of gold for other nations. They've cut that amount more than in half. Now let's take a look at the long-term U.S. gold holdings. So here's where the United States is in the industrial area. You know, it's got 1,000 tons of gold. It doesn't have that much gold. It starts to build its gold reserves. When the United States really got a lot of gold was in 1933. The United States got the bulk of its gold during FDR's executive order requesting that all U.S. citizens turn in their gold. Following that executive order, they got all of the gold coins, or as many as they could, back from out of circulation, and they started to stockpile the gold. They built Fort Knox a couple of years later to put it in. The U.S. government, in the Gold Act, repriced gold up from $20.67 to $35, and they had accumulated during that period of time between the executive order in early 1933 and early 1934. They also accumulated more gold, not just from citizens. So you can see boom, the gold amount that the US held, that's this blue stuff here. You can see here, they accumulated massive amounts of gold. And at one point, the United States government had 20,000 tons of gold. Then in 1944, the US government, along with a bunch of other nations, signed the Bretton Woods Agreement in New Hampshire, which essentially created the system whereby the US dollar would become the world's reserve currency, and that dollar would be convertible into gold, not by US citizens, but by other central banks who accumulated gold, accumulated US dollars in the course of their dealings in international trade, because dollars were used in international trade under the Bretton Woods system. They still are today, but the difference was from 1944 to 1971, the central banks holding dollars could bring them back to the US Treasury and exchange them for gold. And look what they did. They exchanged them for gold in big amounts. And you could see the US gold reserves dropping all the way down to about where it is today, the 8,000 tons. And that's when Richard Nixon, in August of 1971, decided to instruct his Treasury Secretary at the time not to allow the conversion of US dollars from central banks into gold, because we're going to run out of gold. Well, ever since then, the United States has not added any gold and basically still has supposedly the 8,133.50 tons of gold that it had about at the time of the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, look at the Federal Reserve. Same thing. Countries have been asking for their gold back, and you can see it just keeps heading down. So the United States, assuming it has all the gold that hasn't been audited at the Fort Knox, I think there's some in Denver, West Point, some at the New York Fed. If you take all that gold, those 8,100 tons is a far cry from the 2,200 tons it used to have around the time of the Bretton Woods agreements. The New York Fed no longer has 14,000 tons of gold. It now has about 5,700. So the amount of gold held by the United States and or controlled by the New York Fed, which is controlled by the United States, or the other way around, is significantly lower. And that amount now in total is about 14,000 tons. I think the latest here Nick has is 13,910 tons, which is far less than the approximately 27,000 tons. So U.S. gold holdings and gold under control by the U.S. has been more than cut in half. So the Bretton Woods agreements from 1944 to 1973 were a major drain on the U.S. gold reserves. Now, if you want to get some gold yourself or some silver, please consider doing so at the links below, and also at the banners and links on the website at Smaulgld. Smaulgld gets a small commission if you do purchase your gold or silver through the site. Not investment advice, not advising you to buy silver or sell silver, or buy gold or sell gold. But if you are interested in doing so, you've made that decision, please consider doing so through the Smaulgld site. And thank you very much for listening.